It's all about by-elections on the polling station today. It's back to Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi, which may be a good thing after our two visitors last week were left rather red-faced at the election victory of Labour in Batley and Spen. But then again, we were all a bit red-faced. Nobody really predicted it. But what is the prediction in Dublin Bay South? Genuinely one of the most fascinating by-elections in recent times in Ireland, and an extremely volatile betting market. A bandwagon on which Star Sports has now gotten involved with polling going ahead tomorrow, Thursday. William Kedjanyi, good morning.
Good morning to you, and what an intro into this week's episode of the polling station. I should also put my hands up, not to being, actually yes to being red-faced a bit, because I didn't see Kim Ledbetter winning in Batley and Spen. I really didn't see it. I didn't see it being particularly close either, and she managed to squeeze over the line by 324 votes in what I think has to go down as one of the most fascinating by-elections of recent times, personally, and I think we've had quite a few captivating contests.
The strange thing for me is that, you know, we all listened last week and the lads made a very convincing case, but I guess what was fascinating was, you know, the vaccine rollout and the reopening of society has really been, you know, so encouraging if you're a Conservatives fan, or if you're just a normal political person, or if you're even just a floating voter, or somebody who doesn't vote. There wasn't an obvious reason for the Conservatives to lose, apart from maybe the Hancock situation. What happened here, and how did Keir Starmer get such a boost, in which, you know, some people might have been writing his political obituary up until last week?
In terms of what happened, it's a take your pick. I think various things happened. Some Tories said that their canvassing data had been bad, and that apparently Labour voters had been knocked on, which had sort of reminded them there was a by-election on the day. Some people do think the Hancock story did play a part, and, you know, with a margin of 324 votes, it just doesn't take all that much for one particular factor to be the tipping point. My hypothesis is that a number of factors sort of correlated with each other to bring about that result. I do think Labour had a strong ground game. I think Kim Ledbetter as a candidate definitely was a major boost. I am not sure now if another candidate is able to get over the line. I think people rallied to her defence after the intolerable treatment she received in the last week. I think that might have played a part too. I wonder if the Conservatives, this is real hindsight thinking, but I wonder if the Conservatives might feel that maybe they should have run a bolder campaign slightly. But I really do think that is after Lord's Bear show thinking. It's just a thought that I had, because if I was strategizing for them, I probably would have said to keep out of the fray as well. So lots
Keir Starmer is now like 13-8 hot favourite in terms of his year to he replaces Labour leader 2024, and he's gone out to 9-2 in 2021. And I do feel from just reading the reaction to it that he got a massive bounce from this after a really difficult tenure so far after replacing Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, he has got a bounce from that. He's also, I think, probably navigated the last really tricky trap, possibly of the year. I think he'll be supported well enough at conference to make it through another 6 months. I also don't think, we talked about this in depth last week, but I'm not sure that in hindsight the challenges were there. I do think, however, that it would be a bit foolhardy to consider this a sign of long-term well-being for him politically. There are still all the usual problems and the usual caveats, and also I keep thinking back to that Labour source quote, which was basically that this will be Kim's victory, but it would have been Keir's loss. So I can see him being in post for another year or so, but I think there's the issue, I think, of having to make ground at some point against the Tories. Life might become much more difficult for them for a number of reasons. I'm thinking financial here. I'm thinking possibly a very tough winter ahead, which will be tricky to navigate. But for the moment, you know, the average polling for the Tories is still comfortably enough for a majority. And I don't see that particularly changing for any reason in the near future.
Do you think, how do you think Boris will get on in the second half of the year? Because Cummins' revelations just keep coming and coming. This week, I think he said that Boris essentially can't believe he's prime minister. It's like, which I'd actually tend to believe. I mean, a lot of the stuff for Cummins, I mean, he's probably not the most reliable witness necessarily, but, and even if Boris were to sort of, lose his tenure or whatever, is it just like the Tories are just too strong, maybe for Labour to capitalise, or how do you see it?
With the Cummings revelations, you make a good point there, which is that he's not seen as the most reliable messenger. It's annoying, I think, for the government and potentially dangerous that somebody so close to the whole operation is now dropping all these bombs, but also probably handy that it's the person who most people still remember as the guy who drove his kid and his wife to test his eyesight. So there's a credibility issue, I think, there, but it's no end of small little problems. I think things are going to get harder for the Tories over the next few months. You have, first of all, managing the economy. It's pretty clear from the announcements made that the government is going for a let it rip style approach to COVID now. I think that, there's lots of factors that go into your unlocking and your rules, but pretty clear that we've made the decision to just get on with it. That will have been, I think, for economic reasons. But there are also going to be some pretty significant drawbacks as well. It's not as if it's an easy transition that we make. You have stories of people deleting the NHS app that we have here to check in. You're going to have rising infections. You're going to have long COVID. Vaccines, thankfully, have reduced deaths. We know that. They probably have also, they definitely have reduced hospitalizations by a large extent, but we don't have a huge amount of slack in the healthcare system because we're trying to make our way through very tricky elective care procedures that were delayed by the pandemic, where we already had quite a big waiting list. There isn't a huge amount of space for hospital admissions to just keep on rising and rising and rising. That will need to be managed very carefully. The decisions made on or yesterday, which I think will be rubber stamped on the 12th, don't appear, I think, to have taken that into total account. So long story short, there are tricky periods to come. It just depends on how the public reacts to them.
Well, that's it, and I think Boris might have judged this quite well. I'm not saying he's necessarily doing it for the right reasons. I think, as you say, it's kind of economic, and Boris has already gotten COVID, which I wonder how that changes your mentality in the sense that he's sort of immune for so long. He's immune for a period, but at the same time, he allegedly had a near-death experience. So you can imagine, if you're a leader who's had a near-death experience, you're going to be very cautious about reopening. In Ireland, we're looking, we've been so slow at doing everything, which for me is very frustrating. But we're looking at Britain and saying, well, how is this going to go? Because this is something of a guinea pig for us. So has he called it right? And even if it does go wrong, people are probably just fed up with it at this stage.
Yeah, there's definitely a sort of, I think
we can't have another lockdown. His attitude is probably we either have a partial lockdown or we just open up, or we don't have a partial lockdown because that simply isn't an option. So we have another lockdown or we just open up, and he's gone for the latter.
Yeah, and depending on what modelling you used, the 19th being delayed probably doesn't make all that much difference. We're in a Delta wave now, but thankfully, even against Delta, vaccines do work. I think it's very important. I say that because we've been talking about these stats, and they are, I think, worrying, but it's important to recognise that we do have vaccines. They do work against Delta, and if you are watching this, I'm sure you would have been vaccinated already, but if not, definitely go see if you can have your second jab quicker. But a lot of people's patients would have snapped. And Ireland is a good sort of mirror test case, because I've actually just recently been looking at the stats for vaccines in Ireland, and you guys are quite far through it now. I think 64% have one dose or more, and you're using Janssen, which is a game changer because it's a single shot, and that's a lot. It's a lot easier to work your way through younger cohorts if you only need to ask them to get one shot, particularly before you have a later summer reopening. So it's a tricky balance. the story around the world tends to be that countries which have gone and focused solely on healthcare measures have come out better overall. I think that rings true with us in general. But there are still going to be tricky things for the government to deal with, and also the Treasury to deal with. So I'm looking at the fortune of Rishi Sunak, who has been under the radar recently. I don't think he stays out that spotlight for very long, particularly as from next month you're going to find a lot of those support structures going. That is something that does, I think, have the potential to change the polls.
Okay, let's get on to Ireland then. Obviously, really intriguing political landscape at the moment, where Sinn Féin is, without a shadow of a doubt, the leading party in the north, and on polls is the leading party in the south. But the Dublin-based South by-election, effectively the wealthiest constituency in the country. I'm actually sitting in it right now on the border of the constituency, although I'm certainly an outlier in terms of the wealth in the constituency. But Sinn Féin is not polling well, reflecting the fact that Star Sports is 11-1 Lynn Boylan, who was much shorter in the betting only a month ago before there was a significant poll. But what's fascinating here, William, is that Fine Gael have gone for this approach of it's kind of us or Sinn Féin, and in the middle, Ivana Bacik for Labour, who's basically have been polling sort of 3%, and Ivana Bacik has never been elected before. She's gone long odds on now because she polled well, and essentially because of our proportional representation system, Fine Gael is not going to do well on transfers. And this could have repercussions for Leo Varadkar's leadership potentially, because it looks like Fine Gael now 2-1, James Geoghegan gets in. Looks like they're going to lose this by-election, which would mean that Fine Gael has no politician in an election in a constituency in which it always did really well. So it kind of has failed on this. And there will be repercussions for this, but also interesting is that Sinn Féin will try to get their vote out in tomorrow's election. But I think Lynn Boylan was only at something like 11% the last time. Then you have the Greens at 25s on the day that, I was reading the BBC, alarming stuff about near 5% rises in the maximum temperature ever recorded in Canada last week. So it's definitely a good time to be Green, but the Greens have a problem with Eamon Ryan's leadership potentially. So there's a lot going on, but it's just, I guess, for anyone who may not have a major interest. James Geoghegan was probably a 3s on shot about a month ago. He's now 2s against, and we have Ivana Bacik, who's 1-3, representing a Labour Party that's really small. But it could have repercussions for Leo Varadkar, which I think is probably one of the main things.
Yeah, there was a debate about this on RTE's The Week, in which was reviewed by the Independent's political editor Philip Ryan. And I noticed no candidate was given more than a 6 out of 10. That candidate who got a 6 out of 10, only Fine Gael's James Geoghegan. One of an interesting number of cases where housing is playing a part in these single issue by-elections. We saw that here in Cheshire and Amersworth, albeit that was more of a NIMBY HS2 style approach. I think it would have been an issue in Batley. It would have been an issue, I think, in Hartlepool. Going back a bit, definitely an issue here. The way I'm seeing it from overseas is that this is probably opening up politically for Senator Ivana Bacik. Although, and I noticed it was interesting because I actually did check out a bit of it, and she played a pretty straight hand, I thought, in that debate, tried to basically avoid all the really big controversial issues. And
she did, because she went in with such a strong poll, and she made a massive screw up on one issue that I forget exactly what it was, but it was to do with, I think,
the Dublin Bay Task Force.
Exactly, which is already in place, and Geoghegan called her out on that. The problem for Geoghegan is there was a strong article in the Irish Times about his privileged background on Monday, which is a little bit harsh, but at the same time, it's out of kilter with the housing crisis, and there is a massive housing crisis in Dublin, as there is in many other capital cities at the moment, and that might backfire on them. Their other candidate potentially was Kate O'Connell, but she seemingly has fallen out with Leo Varadkar because she rode against him in the leadership battle when she went for Coveney a couple of years ago. So it's like housing. I thought Lynn Boylan would have a great chance in this because Sinn Féin is all about housing. But for some reason, it hasn't really reflected in the betting. But I will say we were calling the by-election. We obviously called it wrong last week. I don't think this is as cut and dried as is suggested. I could see the Greens doing better, Claire Byrne doing better than her price, because She did well in the debate, and also maybe Sinn Féin's massive, famed getting out the vote crusade might get them a little bit closer, but it's not going to be. I'd be amazed if Fine Gael won, actually, to be honest, because he's not going to get the transfers.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good summation of that there. It's interesting because we got some European elections coming across, which I'm sure will be discussed over the next few weeks. And transfers and alternative votes, not something that that British political punters have to take into account all the time. It can be quite a different puzzle. Usually we work here with first past the post, so candidate gets no votes and wins. But for overseas betters, it can be quite a change going from either the US system or the UK system to what you see in most of Europe, actually.
Well, that's interesting, because the British system, obviously first past the post, leads to a two-party system, give or take, because others don't have a chance. The US is obviously a bit kind of screwed up in that regard. But I mean, when you read that report in the BBC about like how utterly frightening and how frightened scientists are by what the temperatures were in Canada, you're like, well, green politics are essentially the only thing that really matter going forward. Yet you've two essentially populist parties in many countries just trying to win elections. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I mean, I digress.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point you make there. I think we are going to get eventually a crossover where it might be too late, possibly. That's a bigger and scarier debate for people smarter than me.
Yeah.
But where we get a crossover for environment-based politics becoming one of the key three issues: health, economy, environment. I think, certainly at least in the next decade, it's going to be, I think, a bigger feature. In fact, actually, it's already playing more of a role in major party manifestos, even if their policy making isn't quite standing up to what's needed. We have had a lot of talk about COP26 in Glasgow, and this year the Conservatives have made an effort to at least appear green. It's something that Labour, I think, has always had in its DNA, or at least it should have had in its DNA. And you have seen polling rises for the Green Party, who are making ground in a number of places. The only issue is under FPTP, can they actually really, get anywhere with it?
Yeah. I guess we'll finish up. I was watching Peter Taylor's documentary, Ireland After Partition, last night. Peter Taylor is one of my favorite journalists, and it was, because he's getting on a bit in life, it was really touching, because it was all about reflection, and showed him making visits to the north from the 70s onwards, nearly 50 years ago now. But Maggie Thatcher's famous line, "Crime is crime is crime," was obviously reiterated. And there I am this morning reading that Maggie Thatcher in the late 80s was warning that climate change was far, far worse than people were imagining. And whatever you can say about her politics subsequently, as I always say, whatever our view of history is, it's wrong. I appreciate Maggie Thatcher slightly differently now, because of her background in terms of before she became a politician, she actually realized that we might be screwed already. And that was in the late 80s. And now we're probably only realizing that now. And it's William and I, it's our generation that might have to save humanity, if you want to include yourself in my generation, which is probably a bit flattering from my perspective.
I don't think there's any doubt that this will be the time where, the course of the future, I think, is set. And it might seem a bit crass to sort of put that in a political punting show, but I definitely think that you'll see Green candidates take a step forward in elections on a local and national level for a few years to come. In fact, Armin Laschet is, I believe, frees on to be the next Chancellor of Germany. I believe he's Green. So
yeah, so Angela Merkel has just she's just kind of given the all clear for this much, much greener proposal on agriculture in Germany as well, which even Lidl and Aldi are kind of stepping up to the plate on it. So I guess that's future. We could be here all day, William, but we better not be.
Absolutely. We absolutely. Also, by the way, my apologies. Armin Laschet is, of course, a member of the CDU. I could never have lived that down. But that said, the Greens are making a push in Germany, and they'll be playing a big, big part over the next few years.
Thanks for your time, William.
Thank you very much for yours.
that was the polling station. Enjoy the football. Enjoy the Star Sports Greyhound Derby this weekend. Enjoy all the politics that you read about in the paper. Enjoy the fact that the climate is still just about cold enough for everyone. And we'll talk to you next week.
Cheers.